It's a non-race week, but it is never a non-drama week with Formula One. And Tim, I think getting into it, we got to start with Red Bull again. They've been the lead story this entire time, and it seems like it's continuing. Earlier this weekend, just to catch everybody up, we heard that Adrian Newey's position, and Adrian Newey, by the way, is a really important guy on Red Bull. He might not be the front-facing guy like Christian Horner or Max Verstappen, but he's the guy widely considered to be the genius behind the race car. And not just this one. The last 14, 15 years of Red Bull being a top 2, top 3 team, right? I mean, it's, in the Sebastian Vettel years, it was Adrian Newey. Yep. And also before that, he had a great career. So his apparently his position has solidified. He's probably going to stay with the team. There's Max and Christian taking some shots at each other. But I want to talk first, Tim, about Helmut Marko. And Helmut Marko, for anybody that doesn't know, is the head of the Red Bull junior driver program. He's done a great job with it. I mean, it had limited success in its early years, but it has given rise to guys like Max Verstappen, Sebastian Vettel, Carlos Sainz, Daniel Ricciardo. Most of the Red Bull drivers that you see are, and I think, is there not more than that? Was Esteban Ocon a part of that too? Or no?
No.
No, he wasn't. Okay, but there's been a ton on the grid that have come through that program. And Tim, Helmut Marko is clearly, there seems to be a 3-way split at Red Bull right now. It seems to be the Marko Verstappen camp, the Mintzlaff Austria camp, and then the Red Bull Thailand and Christian Horner camp. And what's been interesting is you talked about it in the last episode. I think we should mention it again. It was looking like he might be suspended this weekend, but after a meeting with Oliver Mintzlaff, who is the CEO of Red Bull Global, that is, it seems like things have calmed down, and it seems like Mintzlaff's whole goal here is to deal with the tension as long as they can and keep the team together. Does that seem about right?
It sounds fair. I mean, that from everything that's been reported, there were some also reports circulating out there from German media as well that, I believe it was last Sunday that the Thai side, Austrian side met in Dubai to talk about business things, but also talking about Christian Horner and everything that's going on within the team, and how does that affect the team, but how does that affect sponsors? How does that affect things outside of all of that? Now, nobody knows what happened within that meeting or what came about with all of it, but a lot of the reports that we have seen since then are the ones like you had mentioned with like Adrian Newey, and reports coming out saying, he's sort of staying on board and all that kind of stuff. And so it goes in deeper when you look at this as a whole. It's like, that story just keeps getting bigger and bigger, but there's just so much misinformation and we don't know exactly what is going on around there. One of the things that does, though, sound like it could sort of be happening, but maybe not, but probably is essentially maybe potentially Ferrari coming over and seeing if they can start pulling apart some of that Red Bull behind the scenes engineering group of Pierre Vacher and then obviously Adrian Newey and his whole sort of team and structure that they've been able to build out. Now, I think like that's really sort of fascinating when it's like, this is the Piranha Club, right? And the Piranha Club smells a bit of blood in the water. And so they're going to come over and take some nibbles. They may take a limb. They may take an arm. They may take a leg. We don't know. But I definitely could see some potential with Ferrari coming in at some point and maybe picking someone out of that group. Now, who's it going to be? We don't really know. But
not to get too salacious, let me throw something forward. Apparently, it was reported that Adrian Newey's wife liked a tweet about him joining Ferrari with Lewis Hamilton a couple of months ago or whatever it was. Now, that could just be like, okay, LOL, that's hilarious. It doesn't mean anything. But, it does add to the, is he going to go? Is he going to go? And really, Tim, I mean, obviously it takes an entire team to build a car. You do need visionaries at the top. If Adrian Newey were to leave Red Bull, what kind of position would it put them in? Do they have the talent to fill the role if he goes?
Man, that's a tough one, Adam, because I mean, you said it, right? A visionary, right? There's only so many, aerodynamicists, engineers out there who can see things the way Adrian Newey sees things. So like, that's a guy you don't want to lose. Like, you don't want him going anywhere. You want to keep his ass exactly where it is. And so I think for him, he's been doing this for, so long. It really feels like a new challenge could also be needed at some point. Now, I mean, could I see him leaving Red Bull? I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because it's like championship upon championship that they're winning here. They could potentially win next season as well. We don't know about 2026 and what's happening there with either the regulation or the engine. So, to just pick up and leave, I don't necessarily see that happening. But I could see like a guy like Pierre Vacher like being plucked out of there at some point, maybe. I mean, that I would be, if I'm a team principal, Adam, especially if I'm like Frederick Vasseur, like, and I have Lewis Hamilton coming over to my team, I'm definitely going in there and taking a sniff around and seeing what I can pluck out. No
question. Sure. And it's funny because the team seemed bulletproof last year, and so far they have been bulletproof this year. 2 races so far, front row lockouts at the end of the race. 1 and 2, and Max getting pole position in both races. It's just like at a certain point you're like, wow, like this team really will be the only team that can defeat itself, really. And 100%. and I think when you look at the driver side of things, and we're talking about Max Verstappen, and he didn't repudiate what his father said. He did say that if Helmut Marko left the team, that would be bad for his position with the team, and The question would become, okay, where does Max go? Obviously, Mercedes has put themselves front and center on that one. Oh, yeah. Ferrari probably doesn't need a driver. They're good. McLaren's locked up. And I don't see how, unless Aston Martin moves on from Fernando Alonso, I don't know if they're going to be, I mean, they could move on from Fernando Alonso. Max Verstappen is a longer-term driver. But those to me seem like the only two real viable teams. And if Max is going to go, neither of those teams has won a race. Between the two of them, they've won one race since the regulation change. Like it's so when Christian Horner responds and he says, and this is the other part of the story, we have the best car. He's like, I got 16 drivers on the grid that want this seat. And so, and he's talking about Perez's seat for 2025 if Perez doesn't come back. If he had two open seats, I mean, it's kind of fascinating to think about the idea of having the best car and the best driver walks away. And I think then you're going to find out in these regulations how much the driver matters versus how much the car matters. And it is a good point by Christian. Why leave the best car? Tim, is Mercedes truly a viable option for Max Verstappen?
Yeah, it is. I mean, Toto Wolff has literally come out and said that anybody would do handstands.
Yeah.
I think he said
great
to have Max Verstappen in their car. Like that is a very viable option. Like if Max were to be unhappy with the situation at Red Bull and want to make a change, for sure, I believe Toto Wolff would be the first one opening that door, welcoming him into the program for sure. Mm-hmm. But you mentioning Aston Martin, I think it was Adam Cooper who had put out an article about that a few days ago on motorsport.com, and it was an interesting read. I could say that if Fernando calls time on his career, or if he doesn't feel like he has the passion, motivation to keep going. That was always a big thing for Fernando when it comes to contract talks and extending past this season was, do I have everything inside of me to go and dump into, a full calendar year of Formula One racing, knowing that I may not get a win somewhere? That's the question for him. I think if if Flavio Briatore has been over speaking with some folks at Red Bull, I mean, and Max were to say, I'm going down to Mercedes, then who knows? There could be a way in which Fernando makes that switch happen. And I think if that, were to happen, if I'm Fernando Alonso, I mean, that's a great opportunity to win like a potential third world championship and add that to your resume if you're able to get into that seat for 2025. I wouldn't see why a team like Red Bull wouldn't want a driver like Fernando Alonso. I mean, he's operating at the peak of his abilities. This is some of the laps, Adam, some of the laps that guy has done these past two races in qualifying are friggin' astronomical. Like he has been awesome in some situations this year. So, I mean, heck, like I would want Fernando Alonso on my team.
Would you do something like, because Red Bull is lucky they have kind of 4 cars. Would you do something like if let's in this world where Fernando Alonso drives for Red Bull, would you keep Perez because he's familiar with the team? Get Liam Lawson in that second seat, see how he does, and then maybe in 2026 for the regulation change, have a very old and a very young. Yeah, Fernando in 26, Liam Lawson.
I could see what I could see what you're saying. I mean, like, obviously it's all speculation, obviously.
Sure.
We don't know what the heck's going on here, but this is actually kind of fun.
Well, why not speculate? Who cares? So, everybody else is.
I would say, like, look, if I'm the team principal at Red Bull, I would want, okay, how much potential do I see in Liam Lawson? First of all, that would kind of be where I'm starting from, because who I'm going to pair him with has to have, Grand Prix winning experience. And so that for me would be important to pair those two together. So if you're going to get the likes of Fernando Alonso coming over and driving, your car for 2025 in Red Bull Racing, then I would say, Liam Lawson is a smart option because that gives him someone to learn from. But again, you're thinking, okay, well, is he going to be able to keep up? Is he going to be able to protect? We want to win a Constructors' Championship as well, so we need him to be competitive. So then you got to like double back and think, okay, well, I need experience in that second seat as well.
Yeah, well, and you could then have Carlos Sainz or Alex Albon.
Or like, you take if Daniel Ricciardo,
picks it up,
then you grab him and you bring him over, or Yuki Tsunoda if he's still operating like at peak level by mid-season, and that's someone else you could also take a look at for sure. But you have all these options, Adam, like you said, 16 drivers on the grid who would like kill to be a part of that seat. So Carlos Sainz is without a drive. Alex Albon, it does have a drive, but I'm sure he could be convinced to come back. And then, Esteban Ocon as well would be floating around out there, who's also a good option. Very, very good driver. Tough teammate though, but so is everybody at Red Bull. And I think that's the part that's interesting, Tim, is that like, okay, so, you can war game all this stuff. We can try to figure it out. But what does make the most sense, and I think we tried to illustrate it there, is that Red Bull has more options than Max does. And so to me, Max is on such a perch right now. If he is going to leave, don't leave till 26. Don't leave until 2026. You've got a car here that for this 4-year period is going to be probably the most dominant car in Formula One history, outside of like what Mercedes did with Lewis and Nico and Valtteri Bottas. Like you gotta. And I think if you're Oliver Mintzlaff and you're the CEO and you're dealing with the Austrian and the Thai side of ownership at Loggerheads, you're dealing with the team at Loggerheads. The smart thing to do is, I think, what they're doing, which is play for time. Try to keep it together as long as you can. Nothing lasts forever. And maybe, and crazier things have happened than this, maybe it just calms down. Mm-hmm. Maybe they all learn to live with each other, and you get flare-ups here and there, and we know that this person doesn't like this person. They don't sit together at lunch. Okay, but are we winning? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like that thing, right, Adam, with like, NHL, NBA, NFL, like the sports that, we consume and watch a lot, is like winning, sometimes cures sort of everything. When we have like locker room, blowouts, like you guys have talked about on Steve Dangle podcast, right? Like it's like winning is going to cure all that stuff. So I don't know if it's hard to kind of put that in the same sort of perspective in motorsports as it is in like NHL, NBA, NFL, MLB, all that kind of stuff. But
clearly there were issues with Red Bull before. We just weren't aware of them. And
yeah, that's been going on for a while by the sounds of it.
So then winning will work. And I have a hard time. I'm more inclined to believe Christian than Max on this one, as in Christian does have options and Max has two, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I don't see McLaren moving on from Norris or Piastri to get Verstappen. Do you?
I don't like. It's interesting because like obviously Norris signed that longer term deal with McLaren. Mm-hmm. Could he find a way of breaking that? Whatever the clauses are that are in his deal to make that jump to, that would be an interesting, because I actually was thinking about that a few days ago. It'd be like, okay, well, I mean, if I'm like Lando Norris, right? Like I just signed a really long-term lucrative deal, even though we don't know how long it's for, would I be willing to break that security to who knows what, maybe have like, maybe 2-year deal, maybe a 3-year deal. We don't know, but I think like any driver would be willing to try and find a way of breaking their clause to like get into that Red Bull.
What if you're Zach Brown? What does he do? Like, so we know that Red Bull tried to put Lando and Max together. We know that. Lando and Max are buddies. Do you say to Mark Webber and the Oscar Piastri camp, guys, we're going to let you go and we're going to bring in Max Verstappen, and it's vicious, but it's Formula One. Nobody's going to get upset about it. And then Piastri goes, and there would be other race. He probably could get a Mercedes seat. He for sure could get an Aston Martin seat. He for sure, if Alonso moves on, I'm sure Red Bull would be interested. The reality is that, Lando Norris is a spectacular driver and he's established. Max Verstappen is a multi-time world champion. If McLaren has a chance to get it, are they that vicious?
Yeah, I mean, like I think to dive into like a different, like not to change the subject at all, but I mean, you kind of bring up like a kind of a point here when you say when you had said that like essentially Christian Horner has a ton of options, right? But it's like you need that one specific option that is like extremely talented. Like we can't deny like how good Max Verstappen like is, right? Mm-hmm. Like he is a generational driver. Like this guy is absolutely incredible. It's just the way it is. I mean, we see the difference between himself and his teammate, who has been in Formula One for a long time, has a ton of F1 experience, and he's having trouble even trying to keep up and keep pace with him. So I still think you need that specific type of a driver. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, okay, well, where is that on the grid? Even though he's like, 16 drivers lining up for this seat. I mean, yes, it's true, but how many of those are Max Verstappen caliber?
None of them. Zero. Unless Lewis Hamilton's available, and he's not.
Exactly. Like, that's why I'm kind of like, okay, I think, and I've said this on this podcast, we may have 4 of those type of drivers on the grid currently. Mm-hmm. That's Max, obviously, that's Lewis, that's Fernando. Mm-hmm. And then maybe we start talking about like, okay, where do we put Charles Leclerc? Where do we put, George Russell? Like
Lando Norris.
Yeah.
They're in that like, second group.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like where are they? So type deal, right? So it's an interesting thing to see, mm-hmm. right? Play
now. I'm wondering here in terms of like the reason I bring up Piastri leaving McLaren, which I don't think is going to happen, and I think we're just speculating, and that's okay. This is what a podcast is sometimes.
Buddy.
Yeah, no, but I just want to see. Don't you want to see Mark Webber and Christian Horner reunited? Like, wouldn't it be hilarious to see Piastri at Red Bull and see those two have to work together? Like, oh, you think you had it tough with the Verstappens. Welcome back, Mark Webber.
Yeah, right. Welcome back to the show, buddy.
Yeah, like, holy smokes. And I think Christian Horner has said the driver that gave him the most trouble throughout his career was Mark Webber.
I could believe it. Like, I remember like just reading his book, which is right here on the shelf. It is a really good book. If you haven't read it, you should check it out. It's really good. He really spills the beans on a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, but like his relationship with Dietrich Mateschitz is what really kept him in that seat by the sounds of it. When you read that book, right? Like,
yeah.
Because like, I think Helmut wanted him, like he wanted to jettison him out through the fuselage and get rid of him. But like, that's the guy who kind of kept Mark in his seat because he had a strong relationship with him. So, I mean, I don't know about Christian, right? Like I kind of feel like when I read that book, I kind of felt like Adam, like Horner was kind of like this in-between sort of guy. Helmut didn't want him at all, and Mateschitz loved him. Yeah, and it was kind of like Mark just kept reporting to him. That's it.
And I think it gave them a bunch of headaches. But I just think, oh man, this is why this sport is so much fun. So all that said, it seems like things are still not great with Red Bull. But as long as you have a good car, it seems like they'll be able to keep it together. My question is, when the upgrades start coming, are teams going to close the gap? Yeah. And if the teams do close the gap, which I think Ferrari thinks that it can, I think McLaren thinks that it can. I don't get the sense that Mercedes thinks that it can. I think, what is it that Toto Wolff said the other day, that they've had some issues with their sensors. And so the simulator is giving the wrong car. This car is not a direct representation of what it should be on the track, or as direct as it could be. And it's affecting their testing. So that's a problem.
It definitely is. So I don't know Toto didn't really come out and exactly say what a lot of the issues are, but it did kind of sound like they were having some correlation issues with what they do off track with what is happening on track. That is a bit of an issue for sure. But I think for the likes of like James Allison, who is, one of the key components to building the W15, is essentially they need more downforce on the car. That's all there is to it. And that's interesting because like even before we got into preseason testing, I had heard something similar where they weren't happy with the amount of downforce they were able to get onto the W15 for the start of the season. Mm-hmm. And we saw that in the race on last Saturday when, Lewis was trying to keep up with the McLaren in front, like Lando Norris. And he was just like, once they got to the high speed sections, Lando was just like gone, absolutely gone. Cause that car is just so handy in the high speed stuff. So by the time we get to Japan, like Suzuka, maybe we see a different type of McLaren sort of come to the top, and that could be a track where we see Mercedes really start to struggle at until they start to bring those upgrades that could possibly help them generate more load on the car. So that's their key issue really at the moment, is just not enough downforce on that race car. So and if you're getting for those sort of new to Formula One, but if you're getting readings from your simulation tools, or you're getting readings from your wind tunnel, and they're telling you one thing, so you push in that direction, but by the time you push in that direction, you build, you execute, you bring to the car, and it's not working, then there is something there in your programming that may not be working properly.
Right. And to that effect, when I was watching Hamilton and Norris go head to head in Jeddah, one of the things that the McLaren seems to be struggling with is when that rear wing opens, right? There seems to not be, where Red Bull gets 30 kilometers an hour on you, McLaren's getting 13. What can they do about that?
Oh man, there's just so much that happens with that, Adam. I mean, like, I'm definitely not an engineer to go into specific
But it's not a simple fix, is it?
No, definitely not. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with how much load is being built up on the rear wing. So by the time the DRS is activated, it just kind of like is shot out of a gun. I think for Red Bull, when I looked at it on track in Bahrain, like one of the most impressive things when is when it was coming out of slow speed corners. Mm-hmm. Like, it just was like, it was night and day. You could literally stand there and just be like, as soon as Max took off, I was just like, there's no way. Like, that thing coming out of slow corners was just No one could do
ship.
what it was. Yeah, no one could do what it was doing, man. It was like shot out of a gun. It was crazy. I was just like, oh.
The one I wanted to mention too is and obviously because it's a non-race week, these are the types of kind of minutia we can get into. For people that don't know, Tim, why does it take teams so long to format and come with an upgrade package? Like, why is it 5 or 6 races before it? Because for a fan watching, and if you don't know the engineering behind it, you're probably thinking, this is painful to watch it. Why aren't they just doing it now? If they know they're bringing one, why don't they just do it now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think like when you're, especially with these regulations, and they are still quite new. We only are in the 3rd year of them. But that being said, I mean, it's been interesting to watch the teams and how they've succeeded and failed in different aspects. You look at Red Bull, they've succeeded in every single aspect that they've done with this car. They hit the ground running. They hit the ground running with a base that they could easily build upon and make better. They created a chassis that can go in so many different types of directions and still be competitive, and then build on top of that. So they nailed it right out of it. When you've got teams like Ferrari who kind of sort of half nailed it and then like really failed, and then Mercedes, like they showed up and you're like, whoa, this is interesting, and that thing totally was a absolute disaster. But then they just started to go down that road for a 2nd year straight, and you were already wrong the first year. You should have just thrown that thing in a dumpster and like started afresh. When now they're starting to do that in their 3rd season. But if we look at like a team like a Ferrari, and they've really sort of found their way. They've kind of found this sort of sweet spot where they could build upon. And that is something that the drivers always talked about, was finding a sweet spot with the regulation. It's really hard to find it, but once you do, it unlocks a ton of performance. McLaren did something similar last year. And, we could see a team possibly do that again this year. And who is that going to be? We don't really know at the moment. But when you execute on these things, when you're confident with the foundations that you've built, you then go to your simulation tools, you go to your CFD, you go to your wind tunnel, and that's where you start aligning with, okay, we need this, 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 and this. Okay, let's start creating some parts virtually and see, what does the AI simulation say? What does all of this say? What are the numbers we're getting back? And when they start to see, like, okay, this works, this works, this works, okay, let's start pushing in that direction and building and see what we come up with. And then we'll throw it in the wind tunnel. We'll see how that plays out. And so when you've got a team like, like Red Bull, who's really hit the ground running with everything, you don't need to really invest that much time, effort, infrastructure to building a completely new car, right? You've got the bones. They're incredible. Let's build on these bones and see where else it'll take us. And for them, their development package, their development rate, it won't be as aggressive as, say, like an Aston Martin. I feel like they're going to have an aggressive approach to how they're going to execute with their upgrades, and that's going to be very important for them to claw back performance. All in all, these teams for this season, and there's probably like that top 5, top 4 that are in that range where it's like, we have a good platform. Okay, so now you have a good platform. That's great. You have 4 teams that have a great, maybe 5, that have a really good platform, and you can build on that. It's executing those upgrades like we had mentioned previously. That's going to be extremely important.
Tricky and a pain in the ass.
100%. So tricky. Like it's...
Yeah, I mean, because some upgrades slow the car down. You just don't know, right? Sometimes it's
exactly.
pretty wild at that level. Now, last thing before we go, because Oliver Bearman has been, top of Formula One news outside of Red Bull. He had a great performance, and a lot of people have measured him against Charles Leclerc, and obviously he didn't get it into Q3, so that hampered him a little bit. But they're saying that his lap times were not that far off, which is amazing for a rookie that's never driven a hybrid with the batteries and all that stuff. He's done an amazing job.
Yeah.
Ferrari now has 2 absolute superstars in the car for 2025, right? And very likely you don't want a rookie in that spot anyway. This is a guy who has raced for Haas. He has done some practice runs for Haas and that sort of thing. Haas has been known to be, at times, a team that's a bit chaotic. And so, what I would say is, like, there's been plenty of drivers that jump into a car and have a really good first race and then don't have a good career or don't have a great season after. So I'll think about like Mark Webber scoring points in the Minardi, which never scored any points in his opening race, and then not scoring any points the rest of the year, right? You got Nick DeVries having a great race for Williams that secured him the AlphaTauri seat the next year, but then he's, switched out for Daniel Ricciardo halfway through the season, right? What does Ferrari do with Oliver Bearman to make sure that he's ready for Ferrari when Lewis Hamilton is gone?
That's a great question. I mean, you've got to make sure you got to treat it like a Red Bull program, right? Okay. Where you send them to like your junior team and let them get seat time, get that experience, get that knowledge, the knowledge of the finer details of a Formula One car and each racetrack that you visit, because it's way different from Formula 2 on those tracks to Formula One on those tracks. Mm-hmm. They're two totally different things. And so references change, feeling change, what can you do in certain corners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you build up that knowledge base and you execute each weekend. And so for a driver like Ollie Bearman, I mean, if I'm Ferrari, I'm trying to get him into Haas for 2025. I mean, that to me would make most sense. But again, Adam, like you could have a team, come out of nowhere and just, pick him right out of the program. Offer
that
him,
can happen.
Yeah, that can happen. It could happen where they could offer him something really, really big, depending on whatever his contract is with Ferrari. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Maybe he could break whatever that deal is and then go to a team, I don't know, further up the grid, say like a Williams or
right.
Whatever it's going to be. And so I think for him, it's important that next season he's in an F1 car on tracks. Like has to do that. Like, and I'm not talking reserve driver stuff. I'm talking about full-time committed F1 driver. And that I think would be a huge, huge help for him getting that seat if Lewis doesn't carry on past 2026.
Haas has said in the past that they want to stay away from rookie drivers. Do you think they're going to move off that for this kid?
No. I think they take him. I think like Haas would definitely want him. Like why wouldn't you? Right? I mean,
well, I think because of the Schumacher Mazepin experiment.
This is different. This is different. This is a different driver. And not to like throw any shade at Mick Schumacher or anything like that, but like Ollie Bearman is definitely a different type of driver. And if you get that, one driver who's going to help you make a difference, then you have to try and find a way of putting me in the car. You have to. I mean, it's the difference between like finishing 11th and finishing 10th, is having that one driver who can just, he makes that difference, right? That driver, he or she makes that difference. It's like a couple tenths, right? But that couple tenths is really important in Formula One.
Yeah, and it's worth millions. So, millions and millions of dollars. Okay, well, so Tim, here's the thing: we've got a weekend that is race free for Formula One, at least on their schedule, and then obviously next week we've got the lead up to the Melbourne Grand Prix. So everybody's really excited about that. With two Aussie drivers on the grid. It's going to be a spectacular show. So we'll kind of do a little bit more preview of that next week and talk about the track and talk about what's different about it. And some of the drivers that need to have good performances here, because, the great thing about Formula One season is you can overreact from race one, race 2. You can already start to say, we got to start performing or this guy's out.
Who do you think, that one driver is at the moment? I got mine.
Oh, it's Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Daniel Ricciardo. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
And it would be a great story. And like all Daniel Ricciardo really needs to do is like finish 10th, 11th, something like that. Like that car is okay. But I know he had a 40-second pit stop in Jeddah, and I think because there was some sort of issue with the back tire, which doesn't help your time. But like, There was the swap with Yuki Tsunoda. I thought that they were pretty even that race.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. They're pretty
and then
close,
Yuki torched him in Jeddah. I mean, there's just no other way around it. I don't know how the team internally looks at it. Do you have any ideas for Racing Bulls? Like, with that pit stop, you're not getting anywhere. 40-second pit stop, you're absolutely toast.
Yeah, but then he has that spin, and that's on him, right? That spin that he has, the turn 1, I believe, with just not very many laps to go left in the race. That's on him for sure. That's a mistake, and a driver of that caliber can't be making a mistake, like that. Like, you've raced at this track before, that if you take too much of that curb, it's not going to go well.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's fine margins to try and thread that needle. But again, you've been doing this for a long time. That something like that probably shouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things with Ricciardo is like, it's not, is making sure you're keeping your confidence like high. You don't want to have like a relapse of what happened at McLaren, right? Where, your teammate's doing something different with the car. You can't really figure out how to do that. So you're going to try and change what you do to match them. That doesn't work. For a racing driver, you can't change what you are. You can't change that driving style all the time. Like, you can adapt. I mean, that's okay. But to try and fully commit to doing something that someone else is doing you just can't do it. It's not possible. You have to try and bring the car to you and figure it out. And so I think for Ricciardo, it sounded like they got to the bottom of something at the end of this race.
So there were some issues internally?
Yeah, it sounded like, when it came to the engineering side, it sounds like they went the wrong way with something. Okay. And they didn't really figure it out until Parc Fermé had already happened. And so they couldn't really do much with the car. And so they were stuck with what they had. And that's what it sounds like sort of happened there. But again, right, an experienced driver like Daniel Ricciardo should, be thinking that far ahead.
And Melbourne's a great racetrack. It's not like it is somewhat a street course, but it's more like a street race course, I guess, if that makes any sense. There's space. Yeah. You can maneuver, you can pass.
Yeah.
And he's going to be at home. And I wonder if that's going to feel good.
But I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but back in the days when he was with Renault, I want to say it was his first season with Renault. I think
he went off into the grass.
Yeah, he got really watered down with a lot of media and off-track commitment and trying to please everybody that's in Australia instead of making sure that there was a cutoff point for how much media marketing engagements that he did do and focus more on the stuff that he needs to do on track. And I think he learned a lot from that year. I just, the sort of the Red Bull machine, right? It's like there is a lot of marketing and PR commitments. There's a lot they got to do. Granted, I understand it's a part of the job. I think for Daniel, it's important for him to make sure he's focused on executing and coming away with a very solid performance in Australia, because once he does that, like you said, Adam, I think that's going to shut everybody up.
Do you think he can do it?
I think so. He's got the experience, right? I think it's just trying to find out what he needs to do with this car.
Okay.
And I think once he sort of unlocks that, and it kind of sounded that way towards the end of Saudi Arabia, that he's kind of gone in that, he's kind of figured that out. I think once that sort of happens and he's able to unlock the performance that he needs to from the car, then I think he's going to be fine. He's a race winning F1 driver. You don't usually lose that stuff, right, Adam?
No, I don't think so. It's a question of confidence, I think, at this point. So if he's got that will be the guy to watch. Anyway, so Tim, thank you so much for today. We'll have some more shows next week, obviously previewing and getting excited, and I'm sure there'll be some Red Bull drama too over the weekend. So we'll get into it.
Oh boy,
they can't quit.
Thanks, Adam, for doing this. Appreciate it.